Kays. I'm back with Chapter 11 of Charlotte's Web, The Miracle. That sounds exciting. The next day was foggy. Everything on the farm was dripping wet. The grass looked like a magic carpet. The asparagus patch looked like a silver forest. On foggy mornings, Charlotte's Web was truly a thing of beauty. This morning, each thin strand was decorated with dozens of tiny beads of water. The web glistened in the light and made a pattern of loveliness and mystery, like a delicate veil. Even Lurvy, who wasn't particularly interested in beauty, noticed the web when he came with the pig's breakfast. He noted how clearly it showed up, and he noted how big and carefully built it was. And then he took another look, and he saw something that made him set his pail back down. For there, in the center of the web, neatly woven in block letters, was a message. It said, "Some pig." Lurvy felt weak. He brushed his hands across his eyes and stared harder at Charlotte's Web. I'm seeing things," he whispered. He dropped to his knees and uttered a short prayer. Then, forgetting all about Wilbur's breakfast, he walked back to the house and called Mr. Zuckerman. "I think you'd better come down to the pig pen," he said. "Well, what's the trouble?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Anything wrong with my pig?" "Not exactly," said Lurvy. I just think you better come and see for yourself." The two men walked silently down to Wilbur's yard. Lurvy pointed to the spider web. "Do you see what I see?" he asked. Zuckerman stared at the writing on the web, and then he murmured the words, "Some pig." He looked at Lurvy. They both began to tremble. Charlotte, sleepy after her long night's exertions, smiled as she watched. Wilbur came and stood directly under the web. "Some pig," muttered Lurvy in his low voice. "Some pig," whispered Mr. Zuckerman. They stared and stared for a long time at Wilbur, and then they stared at Charlotte. "You don't suppose that spider," began Mr. Zuckerman. But he shook his head and didn't even finish the sentence. Instead, he walked solemnly back up to the house and spoke to his wife. "Edith," he said in a weak voice, "something has happened." He went into the living room and sat down, and Mrs. Zuckerman followed. I got something to tell you, Edith," he said. "I think you better sit down." Mrs. Zuckerman sank into a chair. She was feeling a bit frightened and started to look pale. "Edith," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think you'd best be told that we have a very unusual pig." A look of complete bewilderment came over Mrs. Zuckerman's face. "Homer Zuckerman, what in the world are you talking about?" she said. "This is serious, a serious thing, Edith," he replied. "Our pig is completely out of the ordinary." "Well, what's unusual about the pig?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman, who was beginning to recover from her scare. "Well, I don't rightly know just yet," said Mr. Zuckerman, "but we've received a sign, Edith, a mysterious sign. I'm telling you, a miracle has happened on this farm. You see, there's a large spider's web in the doorway of the barn cellar right over the pig pen, and well, when Lurvy went to feed the pig this morning, he noticed the web because it was foggy, and well, you know how a spider's web looks, very distinct in a fog. Well, right there, spang in the middle of the web, there were the words, 'Some pig.' The words were woven right into the web, I'm telling you. They were actually part of the web, Edith. I know because I've been down there and I seen them. It says 'Some pig,' just as clear can be. There can be no mistake about it. A miracle has happened, and a sign has occurred here on earth, right on our farm, and, well, we have no ordinary pig." "Well," said Mrs. Zuckerman, "seems to me you're a little off. Seems to me we have no ordinary spider." "No," said Mr. Zuckerman, "it's the pig. It's the pig that's unusual. It says so, right there in the middle of the web." Maybe so, said Mrs. Zuckerman, but just the same, I intend to have a look at that spider. No, just a common grey spider, I'm telling you, said Mr. Zuckerman. They got up, and together they walked down to Wilbur's yard. You see there, Edith? That's just a common grey spider. Well, Wilbur was pleased to receive so much attention. Lurvy was still standing there looking at him, and Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman joined him, and all three stood for about an hour reading the words on the web over and over and watching Wilbur. Charlotte was delighted with the way her trick was working. She sat without moving a muscle and listened to the conversation of the people. When a small fly blundered into the web just beyond the word pig, Charlotte dropped quickly down, rolled the fly up, and carried it out of the way. After a while the fog lifted. The web dried off, and the words didn't show up quite so plainly. The Zuckermans and Lurvy walked back to the house. Just before they left the pig pen, Mr. Zuckerman took one last look at Wilbur. You know, he said in an important voice, I've thought all along that pig of ours was an extra good one. That's a solid pig we got there. That pig is as solid as they come. Notice how solid he is around the shoulders there, Lurvy? Oh, sure, I do, said Lurvy. I've always noticed that pig. He's quite a pig. Yep, he's long and he's smooth, said Zuckerman. Oh, that's right, agreed Lurvy. He's as smooth as they come. He's some pig. When Mr. Zuckerman got back to the house, he took off his work clothes and put on his best suit. Then he got into his car and drove to the minister's house. He stayed for an hour and explained to the minister that a miracle had happened on the farm. Well, so far only 4 people on earth know about this miracle. Myself, my wife Edith, my hired man Lurvy, and now you. Well, don't tell anyone else, said the minister. We don't know what it means yet, but perhaps if I give enough thought to it, I'll be able to explain it next Sunday. There can be no doubt that you have a most unusual pig, however. I intend to speak about it in my sermon and point out the fact that this community has been visited by a wondrous animal. By the way, does the pig have a name? Well, yes, said Mr. Zuckerman. My little niece calls him Wilbur. She's a bit of a queer child, full of notions, you know, but she raised that pig on a bottle, and I bought him from her when he was just a month old. Then he shook hands with the minister and left. Now the minister had suggested not telling anyone, but secrets are hard to keep. Long before Sunday came, the news had spread all over the county. Everybody knew that a sign had appeared in a spider's web on the Zuckermans' farm. Everybody knew that the Zuckermans had a wondrous pig, and people came from miles around to look at Wilbur and read the words on Charlotte's web. The Zuckermans' driveway was full of cars and trucks from morning till night. They're all lining up there. Fords and Chevys, Buicks, GMC, pickups, Studebakers, Packers, and DeSotos. The news of a wonderful pig spread clear up into the hills, and farmers came rattling down in their buggies and buckboards to stand hour after hour at Wilbur's pen, admiring this miraculous animal. Everyone said they'd never seen such a pig before in their lives. When Fern told her mother that Avery had tried to hit the Zuckerman's spider with a stick, Mrs. Arable was so shocked she sent Avery to bed without any supper as punishment. In the days that followed, Mr. Zuckerman was so busy entertaining visitors that he neglected his farm. He wore his good clothes all the time now, got right into them when he got up in the morning. Mrs. Zuckerman prepared special meals for Wilbur. Lurvy shaved and got a haircut, and his chief farm duty now was to feed the pig while people looked on. Mr. Zuckerman ordered Lurvy to increase Wilbur's feedings from 3 meals a day to 4 meals a day. And now the Zuckermans were so busy with visitors, they started forgetting about other things on the farm. The blackberries got ripe, and Mrs. Zuckerman failed to put them into the jars. The corn needed hoeing, and Lurvy didn't find time to hoe it. That Sunday the church was full. The minister explained the miracle. He said that the words on the spider's web proved that human beings must always be on the watch for the coming of wonders. All in all, the Zuckerman's pig pen was the center of attraction. Fern was happy, for she felt that Charlotte's trick was working and that Wilbur's life would be saved. But she found that the barn wasn't nearly as a pleasant place to be. There were just too many people now. She liked it better when she could be all alone with her friends, the animals. And that's the end of chapter 11.